Hi, baby. What you doing? We're talking about brains today. You have the biggest brains. Look at those brains. Show everybody your brains. Love your... Oh, God, those are your brains. Those are your brains. Why are your whiskers crooked? Get your butt out of my face. Why, hello there, endurance nerds. If you're watching this, chances are you willingly paid for a hobby that involves chafing, bonking, and calling 8-minute intervals fun, which means you're either incredibly dedicated or emotionally damaged in a very specific but productive way. Either way, welcome to our den of dysfunction. Today, we're not talking about watts, heart rate, or how your threshold isn't what you think it is. We're talking about something far more powerful and something far more likely to hold you back if you never learn to work with it. That 3-pound blob between your ears, your brain. Specifically, how your brain interprets pain and effort, and why some athletes thrive when the pressure builds, while others unravel like a cheap pair of bib shorts. In short, we're going to talk about suffering, that elusive but necessary ingredient in endurance sport, and honestly, anything worth being good at. Let's be real. If endurance sports were purely physical, most of us would have tapped out after the first bonk, cramp, mid-race meltdown, or identity crisis on a treadmill. And yet, we persist. Some athletes seem to come back stronger with every season, more durable, more calm under pressure. Others, they flame out, they overtrain, underperform, and eventually they walk away. But the majority of us, we live somewhere in the middle. Not failing, but not really progressing in the way that we want either. Stuck in that frustrating gray zone, where the work is there, the will is there, but the results we want, they're just not. And that plateau, that stuck feeling, it's not always about your fitness. More often than not, it's about how you relate to suffering. Because the difference between breakthrough and burnout rarely comes down to just grit. It comes down to interpretation, to the way your brain reads effort, responds to pain, and decides, consciously or not, whether you're done. We need to start with a fundamental truth. Pain and suffering, they're not the same thing. Pain is that raw signal, neurological input from your body telling your brain that something stressful is happening. And in endurance sports, pain is expected. You're breaking down tissue, draining fuel stores, stressing your cardiovascular ceiling. Of course it hurts. But suffering, it's different. Some athletes feel pain and treat it as a cue to back off, while others feel the same pain and see it as a green light, a challenge, an opportunity to dig in. The difference is not in their legs, it's in the brain. Pain is information, suffering is what your brain decides to do with that information. That interpretation gets filtered through your nervous system, your training history, your mindset, your past failures, your worst workouts, your best races. It's personal. And it's complex. And as you can imagine, it's a subject of intense focus for sports scientists, coaches, and athletes alike. And there are several different theories out there trying to explain how and why fatigue happens. Some people are going to focus on pure physiology and what's happening in your muscles, and that's certainly a vital component to understand. But an increasing number of them are arguing that the brain plays a leading role, managing risk like your own nervous system air traffic controller. Many of you have likely heard of the central governor theory. This is a theory that suggests that your brain steps in to protect you from overdoing it, like a governor in a car engine, throttling performance to avoid damage. It pulls from your physiology, your emotions, even your beliefs about what you can handle. It's still a relatively debated theory, but it does introduce the key idea that your brain can shut you down long before your body runs out of gas. There are other models out there too, like the psychobiological model, which focuses on motivation and perception of effort, or anticipatory regulation, where your brain paces you based on the expectation of how hard the task will be. And there are some other integrated models out there too that basically say, yes, all of the above. But whatever the framework, they all agree on this. Your brain is not a neutral observer. It's an active player on how hard you can go, how long you can hold on, and when you decide, consciously or not, to tap out. And that means if you want to get stronger, you can't just train your legs. You have to train your relationship with suffering. Some athletes do this without realizing it, and others really have to work at it. But for the best out there, the difference is how they respond when discomfort shows up. Not whether they feel pain, because they do, but whether they've trained themselves to stay present with it instead of flinching away. Athletes who handle suffering well often share certain patterns, not hacks and not magic mantras, but consistent mental habits that shape how they experience discomfort. They don't make the pain go away. They just relate to it differently. And those patterns are often visible long before they're consciously trained. So before we dive into how to build your own capacity to suffer, let's look at what those mental landscapes tend to look like in the people who have already adapted. Now, one of the clearest traits is something called distress tolerance. This is the ability to stay engaged with discomfort without mentally short-circuiting. I'll reiterate here, these athletes don't necessarily hurt less. They just don't panic when it hits. They've learned through repetition or harder life lessons not to interpret effort as danger. Pain isn't a stop sign, it's a terrain feature. Often, this is going to start with reframing. And reframing is the skill of deliberately changing the way you interpret effort. You're deep into that VO2 max interval. Your legs are screaming. Your brain says, nope. But instead of spiraling, the experienced athlete thinks, this is where I level up. We're not talking about toxic positivity. That's cognitive restructuring. You're turning threat into opportunity and rewiring your brain in the process. Some athletes will also lean on dissociation. No, not the clinical kind.
Stewie, can you pass the milk?
Shut up, everyone! Shut up! Shut up!
But the tactical redirection of focus. Instead of obsessing over the burn, they lock onto something neutral. Pedal rhythm, breath timing, landmarks. Studies do show that dissociation can reduce perceived exertion and delay mental fatigue. It's not denial, it's load management for your brain. And then there's chunking. And this is the art of breaking a long effort into mentally manageable pieces. Instead of staring down an entire threshold set or race segment, it's getting to the next tree, the next song, the next marker, the next minute. You're shrinking the size of the dragon that you're fighting, not by cheating, but by choosing your focus. These aren't prescriptions yet. We're going to get there. But if you start listening for these behaviors in your own training or in athletes that you admire, you'll begin to recognize that suffering well isn't just a personality trait. It's a practice pattern. It's a kind of psychological conditioning. And it's why some people genuinely start to crave the edge. Pain becomes meaningful, even enjoyable. That's not just masochism. It's dopamine doing its job. And it all starts with your awareness. Now, of course, not everyone develops that relationship with suffering. And if you spent enough time in endurance sport, you'll start to recognize the competing pattern as well. You see the athletes who start strong, motivated, structured, all in. But over time, something stalls. Workouts get skipped or cut short. Key sessions get modified. The third interval never seems to happen. The numbers stop progressing, and the excuses start to blend together. Just wasn't my day. Didn't sleep well. I'll do better tomorrow. It's rarely about laziness, and it's not about lacking talent or grit. More often, it's because they haven't built a framework for discomfort. They haven't trained themselves to stay with the effort when it starts to feel uncertain or threatening. So they pull back, not always dramatically, but just enough to stay in their comfort zone. And without overload, there's no adaptation. Eventually, the process starts to feel hollow, like they're putting in effort but not getting anything back. And they're not wrong. The effort isn't accumulating. It's leaking out the sides because that hard work, it never fully lands. And that's the hidden cost of avoiding suffering. It doesn't always look like quitting. Sometimes it looks like quiet stagnation, like going through the motions while slowly stepping away from your own potential. What I'm trying to get across to you here is that sometimes the block isn't physical, it's psychological. It turns out a lot of people would rather be miserable than uncomfortable. That's not just a quirk, it's human nature, and probably a concept that could be a 20-minute rant on its own right. Humans will stay in the known misery of stagnation or burnout because it feels safer than the unknown discomfort of changing our approach, or stepping back, or doing things differently, or most notably, being vulnerable enough to possibly fail. In endurance sport, that resistance shows up fast. Athletes start bracing against the pain instead of engaging with it, or they choose external validation, KOMs, podiums, the approval of that one guy who drafts like he's being paid for it. But when your only metric for success lives outside of yourself, the suffering stops being meaningful. It starts feeling like a tax. And maybe all of you watching here have mastered that art of intrinsic validation. I see you too. A common thread in your camp is misaligned infrastructure. Athletes who take on elite level volume with age group level recovery. No massage, no sleep, no flexibility, no buffer. When the system gets overdrawn, they assume they're not fit enough. But that's rarely the full story. This is where neuroscience becomes visible. Mental fatigue directly impacts your brain's ability to manage effort. When the prefrontal cortex, that's the part of your brain that's responsible for emotional regulation and pacing, gets overloaded by life stress, sleep debt, or burnout, your internal governor becomes a nervous wreck. That same session that felt manageable last week suddenly feels like an existential crisis. It's not that your fitness disappeared. Hell, it might even be on the heels of a full rest day and your legs feel fresh. It's that your brain is waving the white flag before your body needs to. That's when suffering stops being useful and starts becoming corrosive. The cognitive tools that you could rely on, composure, perspective, restraint, they all start short-circuiting. Every session becomes a fight. Every effort feels personal, and training morphs from something you express into something you feel obligated to defend. That's not just burnout, that is mismanaged suffering. And that brings us to our actionable section for you goldfish attention spans who skipped ahead, and for you noble few who absorb the context like the emotionally resilient legends that you are. If you're still watching, clearly not afraid of a little cognitive load, go ahead and hit that like button. Maybe even subscribe if you're the type who likes your endurance training with a side of psychological warfare. But how do you actually train your brain to suffer smarter? The tired but necessary disclaimer is that everyone is different, and there is no hard and fast step-by-step process to harden the fuck up. But we can talk about the methods that you can practice, and I do mean practice, to rewire your relationship with suffering. The first method is cognitive restructuring. This is a psychological technique used to challenge and reframe unhelpful thoughts. In plain terms, it's learning to spot the moment that your brain says, this sucks, I can't do this, and consciously replacing it with something more useful, like this is where it gets good, or this is exactly what I trained for. This is not motivational fluff, I promise you. you. It's science, specifically neuroplasticity. Your brain forms thought habits in the same way that your body forms movement habits. If every time you hit the red zone, your inner monologue turns into a panic broadcast, that becomes your default. But if you train yourself to meet effort with something intentional, something that keeps you focused or grounded, you create a new pattern. You literally make it easier for your brain to choose resilience next time. This doesn't mean lying to yourself. You're not pretending that it doesn't hurt. You're choosing to respond to that pain differently. That's the power. You're not fighting suffering, you're giving it a job. The second strategy is controlled exposure. You don't need to go full kamikaze every session, but if you never bump up against your psychological limits, you're not training your brain, you're just babysitting your physiology. Zone 2 is great, it's critical, it builds aerobic efficiency, improves fat metabolism, and keeps you from hating your life every time you go out for a ride or run, but it doesn't do much for mental durability. Well, not unless you're stacking hours until your brain gets bored before your legs get tired. The kind of resilience we're talking about here comes from deliberate, repeated exposure to efforts that demand your full attention. That's what makes it controlled. You're choosing when to enter the pain cave. You're choosing the conditions, and you're choosing how deep to go. Not for punishment, but for adaptation. Think VO2 max intervals, long tempo sets, over-unders, efforts that kick up resistance early and don't let go. If you already have those locked into your plan, great. It might be time to take off the leash now, turn off erg mode, or ignore those pace prompts and push past the prescribed output as hard as you can muster for the interval. Can you get that extra 10 watts in a VO2 max effort? 15 seconds per mile faster for your threshold efforts? The best intensity that you can use for this controlled exposure is likely in the work that you've been avoiding. But the key isn't just enduring the effort, it's how you approach it. You don't go in hoping you survive, or worse yet, expecting to fail. You go in knowing it's going to suck and practicing how to stay engaged anyway. And you know what? You might end up failing anyway, but you're giving your body and brain a teaser for that stimulus. And the next time you come back, it won't be foreign anymore. You don't just get fast in one workout, and you don't learn to suffer in one either. The real growth doesn't happen just from doing the work. It happens in your reflection. After your session, take 2 minutes, not scrolling, not uploading your shit to Strava, but thinking. Ask yourself, when did it start to suck? What did I do in response? What could I do differently next time? And then actually adjust something. That might mean repeating the same session but focusing on staying mentally calm one interval longer, extending a threshold block by 1 or 2 minutes to push your discomfort ceiling, backing off volume next week so that you can hit your hard day mentally fresh, or changing your self-talk cue when you hit your sticking point. If you always fail in interval 3, don't just keep beating yourself up over it. Target it. That's how controlled exposure becomes progressive overload, not just for your legs, but for your brain. Without that step, you're not training mental durability. You're just collecting war stories. Controlled exposure can absolutely be a cheat code in your training. Not all the time, but regularly enough that when the going gets hard, your brain doesn't treat it like a foreign language. The progress may seem subtle here, but when you kit up for your big event or even a key session weeks or months later, the difference will be palpable. Now, the third strategy is mindfulness under duress. And no, I'm not telling you to sit cross-legged and chant during a time trial, but you should practice staying present during hard efforts, because how you relate to discomfort in the moment determines whether you spiral or stay in control. Mindfulness in this context just means not running away from what you're feeling. It's noticing the burn without flinching. It's letting the discomfort exist without labeling it bad or wrong or a sign of failure. When you immediately judge pain as a problem, your brain triggers a stress response. Heart rate spikes, breathing shortens, form breaks down. You shift from measured suffering to panic mode. But if you can stay neutral, if you can observe that effort without trying to escape it, you reduce the overreaction. You're still hurting, but you're not arguing with the hurt. You're just riding alongside of it. Neurologically, this type of presence activates your prefrontal cortex, your control center, and it dials down the amygdala, which is basically your inner drama queen. It gives you more control over how you respond, even if you can't control how it feels. So how do you actually practice this? Start by picking one harder interval in a challenging session. Not all of them, just one. And instead of dissociating or counting pedal strokes to distract yourself, go inward. Pay attention to your breathing. Feel the tightness in your legs. That burning, focus on where it's originating. Feel and track the rise in your heart rate, like you're narrating a documentary in your own head. Don't judge, just observe. And when the voice in your head starts begging for mercy, answer it like a coach, not a critic. This is what hard feels like. I can stay here. That's the real repetition, not the numbers on your screen. It's the skill that separates panic from power. You're not ignoring the pain, you're refusing to catastrophize it. Over time, that gives you the kind of calm that other athletes will interpret as toughness. And the most important strategy, respect recovery. Yeah, I know, I sound like a broken record, but that's because most of you still need to hear this. Again, mental recovery is just as important as physical recovery. And no, that doesn't just mean sleep and a protein shake. It means stepping away from performance mode, intentionally. Take that deload week. Go ride or run without your head unit or watch. Go do something that reminds you why you actually like the sport and not just the metrics it spits out. The unfortunate truth is that you can't keep asking your brain to suffer well if you never let it stop bracing for the next round. Mental fatigue doesn't just make you feel tired, it makes everything feel harder, even if your legs are ready to go. One of the reasons that older athletes can often outperform their younger selves is that they finally learn to respect the cost of stress, all kinds of stress. They've got nothing left to prove, so they recover like it's a part of their training, because it is. So if you're feeling cooked, flat, irritable, like you hate your running shoes, or like your FTP is gaslighting you, that might not be failure. That might be your fatigue telling you that it's time to back off, reset, and return sharper. Recovery isn't the absence of training, it's what makes the training stick. And if you're deep in the pit, get honest. If the suffering feels meaningless, that's a sign to pull back, not push harder. You can't outgrind emotional exhaustion. In the end, what separates the athlete who grows through suffering from the one who burns out isn't just grit. It's interpretation. It's the difference between treating pain as noise or treating it as a signal, between enduring discomfort with purpose or resenting it because you don't understand what it's trying to teach you. Suffering isn't a flaw in endurance sport, it's the entry fee. And the good news is that you can train for it. Just like your aerobic base, your strength, your nutrition strategy, your capacity to suffer well is a skill. And the athletes who stick around year after year, breakthrough after breakthrough, they're the ones that learn not just to tolerate it, but to work with it. I won't pretend we will all start in the same place. Genetics, temperament, upbringing, they all play a role. Some folks are naturally more inclined to tolerate discomfort, and others have been inoculated by life itself, trauma, hardship, or just years of getting knocked down and standing back up. Some people were forged in fire, and others are still learning to stand in the heat. We don't all start at the same psychological start line. For some of us, building a relationship with suffering will take longer and be much harder, but it's still a relationship worth building, because it changes what you're capable of in sport and beyond. So the next time you're deep in the pain cave, don't just survive it, study it. Learn the layout, bring a flashlight, build a damn workshop. But let me know in the comments, was there a time that you learned that you could really suffer? Or maybe that you couldn't? If this video hit you in that prefrontal cortex, smash the like button like you're trying to break through your own mental limits, subscribe if you haven't already, all of that YouTube-y stuff, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.